KaraokeBooks.
The Bride of Lammermoor. Written by Walter Scott. Audiobook. Chapter 20. Lovelier in her own retired abode than Naiad by the side of Grecian brook, or Lady of the Mere, lone sitting by the shores of old romance. Wordsworth. The meditations of Ravenswood were of a very mixed complexion. He saw himself at once in the very dilemma which he had for some time felt apprehensive he might be placed in. The pleasure he felt in Lucy's company had indeed approached to fascination, yet it had never altogether surmounted his internal reluctance to wed with the daughter of his father's foe, and even in forgiving Sir William Ashton the injuries which his family had received, and giving him credit for the kind intentions he professed to entertain, he could not bring himself to contemplate as possible an alliance betwixt their houses. Still, he felt that Alice spoke truth, and that his honor now required he should take an instant leave of Ravenswood Castle, or become a suitor of Lucy Ashton. The possibility of being rejected, too, should he make advances to her wealthy and powerful father, to sue for the hand of an Ashton and be refused, this were a consummation too disgraceful. "I wish her well," he said to himself, "and for her sake I forgive the injuries her father has done to my house, but I will never, no, never see her more." With one bitter pang he adopted this resolution, just as he came to where two paths parted, the one to the Mermaiden's Fountain, where he knew Lucy waited him, the other leading to the castle by another and more circuitous road. He paused an instant when about to take the latter path, thinking what apology he should make for conduct which must needs seem extraordinary, and had just muttered to himself, "Sudden news from Edinburgh. Any pretext will serve. Only let me dally no longer here," when young Henry came flying up to him, half out of breath. Master, you must give Lucy your arm back to the castle, for I cannot give her mine. For Norman is waiting for me, and I am to go with him to make his ring walk, and I would not stay away for a gold Jacobus. And Lucy is afraid to walk home alone, though all the wild knout have been shot, and so you must come away directly. Betwixt two scales equally loaded, a feather's weight will turn the scale. It is impossible for me to leave the young lady in the wood alone, said Ravenswood. To see her once more can be of little consequence, after the frequent meetings we have had. I ought, too, in courtesy, to apprise her of my intention to quit the castle. And having thus satisfied himself that he was taking not only a wise, but an absolutely necessary, step, he took the path to the fatal fountain. Henry no sooner saw him on the way to join his sister than he was off like lightning in another direction, to enjoy the society of the forester in their congenial pursuits. Ravenswood, not allowing himself to give a second thought to the propriety of his own conduct, walked with a quick step towards the stream, where he found Lucy seated alone by the ruin. She sat upon one of the disjointed stones of the ancient fountain, and seemed to watch the progress of its current, as it bubbled forth to daylight, in gay and sparkling profusion, from under the shadow of the ribbed and darksome vault, with which veneration, or perhaps remorse, had canopied its source. To a superstitious eye, Lucy Ashton, folded in her plaited mantle, with her long hair, escaping partly from the snood and falling upon her silver neck, might have suggested the idea of the murdered nymph of the fountain. But Ravenswood only saw a female exquisitely beautiful, and rendered yet more so in his eyes. How could it be otherwise, by the consciousness that she had placed her affections on him? As he gazed on her, he felt his fixed resolution melting like wax in the sun, and hastened, therefore, from his concealment in the neighboring thicket. She saluted him, but did not arise from the stone on which she was seated. "My madcap brother," she said, "has left me, but I expect him back in a few minutes, for, fortunately, as anything pleases him for a minute, nothing has charms for him much longer." Ravenswood did not feel the power of informing Lucy that her brother meditated a distant excursion, and would not return in haste. He sat himself down on the grass, at some little distance from Miss Ashton, and both were silent for a short space. "I like this spot," said Lucy at length, as if she found the silence embarrassing. The bubbling murmur of the clear fountain, the waving of the trees, the profusion of grass and wild flowers that rise among the ruins, make it like a scene in romance. "I think, too, I have heard it is a spot connected with the legendary lore which I love so well." "It has been thought," answered Ravenswood, "a fatal spot to my family. And I have some reason to term it so, for it was here I first saw Miss Ashton, and it is here I must take my leave of her forever." The blood, which the first part of this speech called into Lucy's cheeks, was speedily expelled by its conclusion. "To take leave of us, master," she exclaimed. "What can have happened to hurry you away? I know Alice dislikes my father, and I hardly understood her humor today, it was so mysterious. But I am certain my father is sincerely grateful for the high service you rendered us. Let me hope that, having won your friendship heartily, we shall not lose it lightly." "Lose it, Miss Ashton," said the master of Ravenswood. "No, wherever my fortune calls me, whatever she inflicts upon me, it is your friend, your sincere friend, who acts or suffers. But there is a fate on me, and I must go, or I shall add the ruin of others to my own." "Yet do not go from us, master," said Lucy, and she laid her hand, in all simplicity and kindness, upon the skirt of his cloak, as if to detain him. "You shall not part from us. My father is powerful, he has friends that are more so than himself. Do not go till you see what his gratitude will do for you. Believe me, he is already laboring in your behalf with the council." "It may be so," said the master, proudly, "yet it is not to your father, Miss Ashton, but to my own exertions, that I ought to owe success in the career on which I am about to enter. My preparations are already made, a sword and a cloak, and a bold heart and a determined hand." Lucy covered her face her hands, and the tears, in spite of her, forced their way between her fingers. "Forgive me," said Ravenswood, taking her right hand, which, after slight resistance, she yielded to him, still continuing to shade her face with the left. "I am too rude, too rough, too intractable to deal with any being so soft and gentle as you are. Forget that so stern a vision has crossed your path of life, and let me pursue mine, sure that I can meet with no worse misfortune after the moment it divides me from your side." Lucy wept on, but her tears were less bitter. Each attempt which the master made to explain his purpose of departure only proved a new evidence of his desire to stay, until, at length, instead of bidding her farewell, he gave his faith to her forever, and received her troth in return. The whole passed so suddenly, and arose so much out of the immediate impulse of the moment, that ere the master of Ravenswood could reflect upon the consequences of the step which he had taken, their lips, as well as their hands, had pledged the sincerity of their affection. "And now," he said, after a moment's consideration, "it is fit I should speak to Sir William Ashton. He must know of our engagement." Ravenswood must not seem to dwell under his roof to solicit clandestinely the affections of his daughter. "You would not speak to my father on the subject," said Lucy, doubtingly, and then added more warmly, "Oh, do not, do not. Let your lot in life be determined, your station and purpose ascertained, before you address my father. I am sure he loves you, I think he will consent, but then my mother—" She paused, ashamed to express the doubt she felt how far her father dared to form any positive resolution on this most important subject without the consent of his lady. "Your mother, my Lucy," replied Ravenswood. "She is of the house of Douglas, a house that has intermarried with mine even when its glory and power were at the highest. What could your mother object to my alliance?" "I did not say object," said Lucy, "but she is jealous of her rights, and may claim a mother's title to be consulted in the first instance." "Be it so," replied Ravenswood. "London is distant, but a letter will reach it and receive an answer within a fortnight. I will not press on the Lord Keeper for an instant reply to my proposal." "But," hesitated Lucy, "were it not better to wait a few weeks? Were my mother to see you, to know you, I am sure she would approve. But you are unacquainted personally, and the ancient feud between the families." Ravenswood fixed upon her his keen dark eyes, as if he was desirous of penetrating into her very soul. "Lucy," he said, "I have sacrificed to you projects of vengeance long nursed, and sworn to with ceremonies little better than heathen. I sacrificed them to your image, ere I knew the worth which it represented. In the evening which succeeded my poor father's funeral, I cut a lock from my hair, and, as it consumed in the fire, I swore that my rage and revenge should pursue his enemies, until they shriveled before me like that scorched-up symbol of annihilation." "It was a deadly sin," said Lucy, turning pale, "to make a vow so fatal." "I acknowledge it," said Ravenswood, "and it had been a worse crime to keep it. It was for your sake that I abjured these purposes of vengeance, though I scarce knew that such was the argument by which I was conquered, until I saw you once more, and became conscious of the influence you possessed over me." "And why do you now," said Lucy, "recall sentiments so terrible, sentiments so inconsistent with those you profess for me, with those your importunity has prevailed on me to acknowledge?" "Because," said her lover, "I would impress on you the price at which I have bought your love, the right I have to expect your constancy. I say not that I have bartered for it the honor of my house, its last remaining possession, but though I say it not, and think it not, I cannot conceal from myself that the world may do both." "If such are your sentiments," said Lucy, "you have played a cruel game with me. But it is not too late to give it over. Take back the faith and troth which you could not plight to me without suffering abatement of honor. Let what is past be as if it had not been. Forget me. I will endeavor to forget myself." "You do me injustice," said the Master of Ravenswood, "by all I hold true and honorable. You do me the extremity of injustice. If I mentioned the price at which I have bought your love, it is only to show how much I prize it, to bind our engagement by a still firmer tie, and to show, by what I have done to attain this station in your regard, how much I must suffer should you ever break your faith." "And why, Ravenswood," answered Lucy, "should you think that possible? Why should you urge me with even the mention of infidelity? Is it because I ask you to delay applying to my father for a little space of time? Bind me by what vows you please. If vows are unnecessary to secure constancy, they may yet prevent suspicion." Ravenswood pleaded, apologized, and even kneeled, to appease her displeasure, and Lucy, as placable as she was single-hearted, readily forgave the offense which his doubts had implied. The dispute thus agitated, however, ended by the lovers going through an emblematic ceremony of their troth plight, of which the vulgar still preserve some traces. They broke betwixt them the thin broad piece of gold which Alice had refused to receive from Ravenswood. "And never shall this leave my bosom," said Lucy, as she hung the piece of gold round her neck, and concealed it with her handkerchief, "until you, Edgar Ravenswood, ask me to resign it to you, and, while I wear it, never shall that heart acknowledge another love than yours." With like protestations, Ravenswood placed his portion of the coin opposite to his heart. And now, at length, it struck them that time had hurried fast on during this interview, and their absence at the castle would be subject of remark, if not of alarm. As they arose to leave the fountain which had been witness of their mutual engagement, an arrow whistled through the air, and struck a raven perched on the sere branch of an old oak, near to where they had been seated. The bird fluttered a few yards and dropped at the feet of Lucy, whose dress was stained with some spots of its blood. Miss Ashton was much alarmed, and Ravenswood, surprised and angry, looked everywhere for the marksman, who had given them a proof of his skill as little expected as desired. He was not long of discovering himself, being no other than Henry Ashton, who came running up with a crossbow in his hand. "I knew I should startle you," he said, "and do you know, you looked so busy that I hoped it would have fallen souse on your heads before you were aware of it." "What was the master saying to you, Lucy?" "I was telling your sister what an idle lad you were, keeping us waiting here for you so long," said Ravenswood, to save Lucy's confusion. "Waiting for me? Why, I told you to see Lucy home, and that I was to go to make the ring walk with old Norman in the hayberry thicket, and you may be sure that would take a good hour, and we have all the deer's marks and furnishes got, while you were sitting here with Lucy, like a lazy loon." "Well, well, Mr. Henry," said Ravenswood, "but let us see how you will answer to me for killing the raven. Do you know, the ravens are all under the protection of the lords of Ravenswood, and to kill one in their presence is such bad luck that it deserves the stab?" "And that's what Norman said," replied the boy. "He came as far with me as within a flight shot of you, and he said he never saw a raven sit still so near living folk, and he wished it might be for good luck, for the raven is one of the wildest birds that flies, unless it be a tame one. And so I crept on, till I was within 80 yards of him, and then whiz went the bolt, and there he lies, faith." "Was it not well shot?" "And, I dare say, I have not shot in a crossbow, not 10 times, maybe." "Admirably shot, indeed," said Ravenswood, "and you will be a fine marksman if you practice hard." "And that's what Norman says," answered the boy, "but I am sure it is not my fault if I do not practice enough. For, of free will, I would do little else, only my father and tutor are angry sometimes, and only Miss Lucy there gives herself airs about my being busy, for all she can sit idle by a well side the whole day, when she has a handsome young gentleman to prate with. I have known her do so 20 times, if you will believe me." The boy looked at his sister as he spoke, and, in the midst of his mischievous chatter, had the sense to see that he was really inflicting pain upon her, though without being able to comprehend the cause or the amount. "Come now, Lucy," he said, "don't greet, and if I have said anything beside the mark, I'll deny it again, and what does the master of Ravenswood care if you had 100 sweethearts? So ne'er put finger in your eye about it." The master of Ravenswood was, for the moment, scarce satisfied with what he heard, yet his good sense naturally regarded it as the chatter of a spoiled boy, who strove to mortify his sister in the point which seemed most accessible for the time. But, although of a temper equally slow in receiving impressions and obstinate in retaining them, the prattle of Henry served to nourish in his mind some vague suspicion that his present engagement might only end in his being exposed, like a conquered enemy in a Roman triumph, a captive attendant on the car of a victor who meditated only the satiating his pride at the expense of the vanquished. There was, we repeat it, no real ground whatever for such an apprehension, nor could he be said seriously to entertain such for a moment. Indeed, it was impossible to look at the clear blue eye of Lucy Ashton, and entertain the slightest permanent doubt concerning the sincerity of her disposition. Still, however, conscious pride and conscious poverty combined to render a mind suspicious which in more fortunate circumstances would have been a stranger to that as well as to every other meanness. They reached the castle, where Sir William Ashton, who had been alarmed by the length of their stay, met them in the hall. Had Lucy, he said, been in any other company than that of one who had shown he had so complete power of protecting her, he confessed he should have been very uneasy, and would have dispatched persons in quest of them. But, in the company of the master of Ravenswood, he knew his daughter had nothing to dread. Lucy commenced some apology for their long delay, but, conscience struck, became confused as she proceeded, and when Ravenswood, coming to her assistance, endeavored to render the explanation complete and satisfactory, he only involved himself in the same disorder, like one who, endeavoring to extricate his companion from a slough, entangles himself in the same tenacious swamp. It cannot be supposed that the confusion of the two youthful lovers escaped the observation of the subtle lawyer, accustomed, by habit and profession, to trace human nature through all her windings. but it was not his present policy to take any notice of what he observed. He desired to hold the master of Ravenswood bound, but wished that he himself should remain free, and it did not occur to him that his plan might be defeated by Lucy's returning the passion which he hoped she might inspire. If she should adopt some romantic feelings towards Ravenswood, in which circumstances, or the positive and absolute opposition of Lady Ashton, might render it unadvisable to indulge her, the Lord Keeper conceived they might be easily superseded and annulled by a journey to Edinburgh, or even to London, a new set of Brussels lace, and the soft whispers of half a dozen lovers, anxious to replace him whom it was convenient she should renounce. This was his provision for the worst view of the case. But, according to its more probable issue, any passing favors she might entertain for the master of Ravenswood might require encouragement rather than repression. This seemed the more likely, as he had that very morning, since their departure from the castle, received a letter, the contents of which he hastened to communicate to Ravenswood. A foot-post had arrived with a packet to the Lord Keeper from that friend whom we have already mentioned, who was laboring hard underhand to consolidate a band of patriots, at the head of whom stood Sir William's greatest terror, the active and ambitious Marquis of A. The success of this convenient friend had been such, that he had obtained from Sir William, not indeed a directly favorable answer, but certainly a most patient hearing. This he had reported to his principal, who had replied by the ancient French adage, Château qui parle, et femme qui écoute, l'une et l'autre va se rendre. A statesman who hears you propose a change of measures without reply was, according to the Marquise's opinion, in the situation of the fortress which parleys and the lady who listens, and he resolved to press the siege of the Lord Keeper. The packet, therefore, contained a letter from his friend and ally, and another from himself, to the Lord Keeper, frankly offering an unceremonious visit. They were crossing the country to go to the southward. The roads were indifferent, the accommodation of the inns as execrable as possible. The Lord Keeper had been long acquainted intimately with one of his correspondents, and, though more slightly known to the Marquis, had yet enough of his lordship's acquaintance to render the visit sufficiently natural, and to shut the mouths of those who might be disposed to impute it to a political intrigue. He instantly accepted the offered visit, determined, however, that he would not pledge himself an inch farther for the furtherance of their views than reason, by which he meant his own self-interest, should plainly point out to him as proper. Two circumstances particularly delighted him, the presence of Ravenswood, and the absence of his own lady. By having the former under his roof, he conceived he might be able to quash all such hazardous and hostile proceedings as he might otherwise have been engaged in, under the patronage of the Marquis, and Lucy, he foresaw, would make, for his immediate purpose of delay and procrastination, a much better mistress of his family than her mother, who would, he was sure, in some shape or other, contrive to disconcert his political schemes by her proud and implacable temper. His anxious solicitations that the master would stay to receive his kinsman were, of course, readily complied with, since the éclaircissement which had taken place at the Mermaiden's Fountain had removed all wish for sudden departure. Lucy and Lockhart had, therefore, orders to provide all things necessary in their different departments, for receiving the expected guests with a pomp and display of luxury very uncommon in Scotland at that remote period.
If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the channel.